We are going to cover today the second part of our series that is about IP rights in the agri-food sector. We will cover the interfaces among geographical indication, trademark, patents, and variety denomination, together with our special guest today, Ursula Lamberti from the CPVO, which is the European Agencies for Plant Variety Protection. But before we actually start with the real content, so to say, the actual technical content of today's presentation, just let me welcome you, of course, and also introduce the GoToWebinar specifics that we're going to use today, as well as myself and the European IP Helpdesk. So my name is Michele Dubi, and I'm part of the European IP Helpdesk training team. And today, as you might have already noticed, you are all muted. That does not mean, however, that you're not welcome to ask questions. We actually gladly answer to all of your questions. We will do that, however, at the end of the presentation. And for each and every questions that you are going to write in the question part of the screen on the right-hand side of the screen, I will then write them in here, and at the end of the presentation we will go to each and every one of them and give them a proper answer. The first question we usually receive in each and every webinar is when are you going to receive the slides, presentation, and the recording of today's webinar, and that's going to happen at the latest tomorrow morning. So as usual, for those of you who have already followed the European IP Helpdesk webinars, I will prepare a follow-up email, and I will then provide to you a communication with the email and the necessary information. Having said that, I will go on to the European IP Helpdesk part. Therefore, just give me 1 second to open up. Right. So for those of you who are with us for the first time, the European IP Helpdesk is a service initiative of the European Commission that has the objective of addressing current and potential beneficiaries of EU-funded project researchers and small and medium enterprises across the European Union. However, those target groups are not the only users of our services, are not the only client that we try to help with our activities, but anyone who's actually interested in intellectual property and intellectual property rights, just for this simple reason, is entitled to request the services of the European IP Helpdesk. Such services, you can see them on the right-hand side of the screen. We provide trainings like today, on-site and online. Of course, on-site trainings have been hard to provide in the last few years, but we have expanded our online offer. There is also a website which has changed. For those of you who have not realized the change up until now, please check the new website where we are embedded together with the other SME IP Helpdesk in China, India, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. And the new website is ec.europa.eu/IP-helpdesk. This is very important because actually the website is the cornerstone of all of our services, and through the website you can have access to trainings, to publications that are downloadable online free of charge, to the names and location of our ambassadors and other events around Europe, but probably most importantly, you have access to the helpline and helpline services. So this is, of course, all offered free of charge, and we want to request, of course, to be paid €1 in order to do that, because we are a public funded initiative anyway. Just to remind you, perhaps the most important of the services, which is the helpline, which is a free of charge first line IP support. It's free of charge, as I said before. First line IP support basically means that the helpline is going to explain to you the basics of the IP discipline regarding which you might have questions. But for example, they're not going to prepare legal documents for you. They're not going to file a patent for you. That is something that perhaps can be suggested by the helpline, but not directly done. For this, there are qualified experts and professionals that can actually help you further. However, the services of the helpline are personal and to the point, in the sense that all the questions are your questions and all the answers are the answers to those questions and are going to be answered within 3 working days via email, phone, or website. The questions can be asked in English and other languages. We would suggest to ask them in English, and all the content that you're going to share with the helpline is going to be kept confidential. I'll talk to you about a little bit about the website, the training, the publications, which are free of charge. But besides, we also have audiovisual content available on YouTube, where our experts are explaining the content of the webinar, for example, or animated videos are explaining the basics of the IP discipline. We are also active on social media like Twitter and LinkedIn. So if you want to discuss with us regarding IP topics, we're very happy to do that on those forums. I told you we have expanded our training offer, and actually that is pretty large up until now. So large that I couldn't put it inside only one slide. So this is our offer for the second half of the year 2021. And as you can see, I left a couple of webinars that had already taken place. So they've taken place in July, for example, and some of them in September already. I did this because I wanted to tell you also that even if you have missed one of the webinars, you can actually request to have access to the recording. As all the webinars are recorded, you can check them out even after the webinar has taken place at any moment you like, simply by clicking on a link and requesting and inserting your name, surname, and email account. Here they are. You will receive them in the follow-up email anyway, and you're actually very welcome to register for each and every one of them until the end of November. This year, we also expanded the fruitful collaboration with the Community Plan Variety Office. Are on the left-hand side of the webinar that have taken place in the first half of the year, and on the right-hand side, the webinars that are going to take place or have taken place in the second part of the year. So you see, we have 8 webinars only regarding plant varieties and the relationship with other intellectual property rights and claims. So we're very happy about this possibility that we had to work with the Community Plant Variety Office and with Ursula in particular. Also, Siopra is part of this collaboration from this year on, and it's really a pleasure to be able to work with the professional inside this organization. If you're interested in further services regarding innovation support for small and medium enterprises, please check out these titles that I have linked for you in here. And if you might think that they are useful for your activities and services, do not hesitate to apply for them or contact the responsible people within those initiatives. You'll receive them anyway as well. If some of the ambassadors that are working with us are connected, a very warm and a big thank you from our side, because they are a important pillar of the European IP Helpdesk, and they allow us to get in touch with the, I would say, economic and social tissue of the different countries in the European Union, because they are the representation of the European IP helpers within the country in which they are based. They speak the language, and they perhaps can also help you better than the European the European IP helpdesk can in many matters of your day-to-day activities. So if you want to check out whether there's an ambassador in your vicinities, please simply check that out inside or on the European IP Helpdesk website in the ambassador page, and we're going to be very happy, certainly, to collaborate with you. I wanted also to mention that today's presentation is recorded, but we just do that in order to be able to allow you to watch the presentation later on, or even look at this in case you would like to understand better some parts that you might have missed, or in case you have missed it completely, you'll always have the chance to see it once again. Now, having said that, I think that my part in the presentation is now over, and I'm more than happy to leave the word to Ursula in order to start with their presentation and the actual technical content of today's webinar. So, Ursula, the floor is yours, and you can show the presentation if you'd like to.
Okay, thank you, Michele. I hope that you can hear me well, and I'll.
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Can you see the presentation?
And I can also see the presentation perfectly.
Okay, this is great. Thank you. Thank you, Michele. Thank you to the help desk and to everyone who showed up today for the interest and this once again opportunity to cooperate and to talk about plant variety rights, but not only. My name is Ursula Lamberti. I work as a legal advisor at the CPVO, as Michele was saying, the European Union agency granting plant variety rights, and I also have a little bit of experience in trademark examination. I spent a few years at UIPO as a trademark examiner. And I'm telling you this because today we're going to talk about the interface and conflicts and also synergies among some of the signs and intellectual property rights that we see in the agri-food sector. We will also talk about patents, but this will be more for the sake of completeness in the end of this presentation. I would like today to focus more on signs, on the words that we see on our agri-food products, so geographical indications, trademarks, and plant variety denomination. We will see how they overlap and how we can use them together. Okay, so this is the outline, very simple, very straight to the point, and I'll start with the role of signs in our everyday life. This is a little bit of a recap of our previous presentation that you can find in the follow-up email that you will receive by tomorrow morning. We can include the link to this presentation, even if Michele was mentioning it before. And there we talked about all the basic notions connected to these IP rights in the agri-food sector. So the role of signs, meaning geographical indications, trademarks, and plant variety denomination, is to help us choose the products that are on the market. Nowadays we can see a lot of offer at the supermarket when we are a grower, when we are trying to grow a certain plant varieties, and the signs help us to buy again maybe something that we had a good experience with, or not buy again something that we didn't really like in the past. Or if I'm a grower, to have the certainty that a certain plant variety will show the characteristics I want when I grow them, so that I can sell it on a certain market. And in the case of geographical indication, is that it's more linked to the quality of the food product, as we will see later. So the commonalities, what do these three IP rights, once again, geographical indications, trademarks, and plant variety denominations have in common? First of all, with their sign, well, we just say that they help us make a choice, and they identify goods and services in the case of trademarks. Actually, today we will talk about more the overlap among these IP rights, so we will not mention the services in trademarks, but you have to know that they can, of course, identify not only products, not only agricultural products, so all kind of products and services. On the marketplace, so we have several marketplaces. You have the retail market, but you also have the market targeting growers, for instance, as we were saying before. They provided information on the specific good. The information is that a certain plant variety, as we were saying before, has certain characteristics, as will ensure a certain yield, or the information is that a certain product has a hype, is fashionable maybe, or has a certain quality. For instance, with the queso manchego that we saw before, we know that that's a very high quality cheese that comes from Spain, etc. They facilitated the purchase choice within a competitive environment. We were mentioning that before. High competition, a lot of offers, a lot of undertakings on the market. As consumers, as producers, we do need some kind of help, right? These IP rights also display some differences, and they are about the information provided, their function, the scope of protection, the relevant public, or what the public that they target, and we will see that in a second. This I hope that you can see the presentation, because I have this little. Okay, these IP rights, of course, coexist on the market, coexist in the legal world, and they can generate conflict, but also synergies. And we will see how to use them on the market in a wise way. A little bit of a recap again about trademarks. This is the legal framework. I will not go in depth about this again. However, you will have it in the presentation just in case. They are assigned, they are used to distinguish goods and services on the market, and they indicate the commercial origin of those goods and services. Geographical indications, this is the legal framework, and these are also signs, as we were saying before, identify certain goods that originate from a certain area. When this origin, of course, means quality, means that the foodstuff or the wine, the spirit, has certain characteristics. And plant variety rights, this is the legal framework, and they are the generic name of a plant variety. You know that a plant variety is a precisely defined group of plants, and it can be protected when it has certain characteristics that the US criteria, these are technical characteristics, was never put on the market, and as a variety denomination. So we make this little difference between all plant varieties and the ones that are, let's say, novel and distinct in respect when compared to the common knowledge, and these are protected. When we want to protect a plant variety, a new plant that has certain characteristics, like it's very productive, or it has a very nice flower color, for instance, we need to give it a generic designation. Plant variety denomination is a requirement for registration, and it must not mislead or confuse the purchaser, so usually the grower, on the nature or other characteristics of the plant variety. Okay, so these are the basics of these first three IP rights that we will talk about, and as you can see here, we have an example of the three. First of all, where is the IP right? Where is the IP right embedded? As I was saying before, a plant variety denomination is a requirement for registration. We need to identify the new the novel plant variety on the market somehow. Why? You have to consider that usually plant varieties are sold to the growers, so to the one that will cultivate them and then sell them on the market, like in seed bags or as plantlings, so very little plants. And it's very hard in that case to know what are the characteristics, how they will be, how the plant will turn out once that is cultivated, right? So the plant variety denomination is a way to tell the grower, look, this planting, this bag of seed will have these characteristics, and this is why it's a requirement for registration. It is needed to identify it on the market. But the IP right is not embedded in the denomination, but on the plant. The true innovation is not the name of the plant variety, but the plant variety itself. Oh, as we were saying before, a very productive corn, a very nice flower, etc. This is different from trademarks and GIs, where the IP right is in the sign. So the scope of protection of the right is also embedded in the denomination that in the wording that we use, in the logo that we use, like in this pink lady example, or the apple from Südtirol example. Yeah, of course, in trademarks, a part of the scope of protection is also the goods and services, and in the GIs, of course, it's related to the good that it identifies, but this is part of the scope of protection, and this does not happen for plant variety denominations. Who uses the sign? This is also very interesting. In the case of trademark is the holder. The holder has an exclusive right, and once the trademark is registered, and it can let's say carry out the function of identifying the commercial origin of the goods and services on the market, the holder of the trademark, so the person holding the title, is the only one who can use that specific wording or that specific logo, which means that it's the owner and the other parties with the holder's consent, right? In this case, we can conclude license agreements, etc. In the case of GIs, this is not quite the case. We have a collective right. There is not only one person who is the holder of a geographical indication, but let's say that all the producers of a certain area that satisfies the conditions to use the GI have the right to use that geographical indication on their products, which means that, as you can see, it has a completely different purpose as the trademark. Of course, it has to be said that GIs and trademarks can be used together. As a producer may satisfy the specification, the product specification of the GI, and then use a trademark next to it. For plant variety denomination, this is not the case. Anyone commercializing the plant variety on the market, so the holder or all the others, the grower, have the obligation to use the plant variety denomination, because if this obligation doesn't exist, we would not be able to identify that bag of seeds on the market. So as you can see, the use is completely different. The products, we saw that with trademarks, any product can be labeled with a certain logo to indicate the commercial origin, and even services. For GIs, we have agricultural products, so usually agricultural products in the sense of raw materials. We have foodstuffs, so they are prepared. It's a raw material that went through a certain process, like in the case of cheese and ham, etc. And we also have wines and spirits, like in the case of champagne, etc. As for plant variety denomination, you can see that the products labeled with the plant variety denominations are divided in a slightly different way, because they follow a different logic, and it's agricultural crops like cereals and fodder, fruit and vegetables, and ornamentals. So as you can see, it's not only about food stuff, right? Other features that can that characterize these three IP rights are the duration. As we know, trademarks have a duration that can be potentially unlimited until we pay the renewal fee. We have the right to use this label to identify the goods and services on the market. For the GIs, this is also the case, and for the plan variety denomination, it is the case, but we have to remember that it doesn't go together with the duration of the right. It is essential to remember that once a plan variety denomination has been used together with the plan variety, the obligation of use continues even after the expiry of the right, because even if the plan variety is not novel anymore, so after 25 or 30 years, depending on the species, even if the variety is not novel anymore, that doesn't mean that we still don't need to identify that bag of seeds on the market. So the obligation to use the plan variety denomination keeps going even after the IP right has expired. Consumers, they're not the same. In the case of trademarks, there can be all kinds of consumers, so it really depends on the nature of the good and service, on the good and or service. And in the case of foodstuff, is normally the general consumer, so with the average knowledge of the characteristics of the goods and services. And as of the geographical indication, we have a consumer that is an average consumer, but with a certain knowledge of the quality of the product and why the geographical indication, what exactly the geographical indication means, what the origin means as of the quality of the product. And as of plan variety denomination or plan variety rights in general, the consumers are, or actually, as we were saying before, the growers, the ones who would need to know the characteristics of the plant variety when growing it and then putting it on the market. We also consider that for some very specific cases, for the plant variety, we also take into consideration the final consumers. This is the case of some kind of fruits and vegetables that are sold on the market using directly the plant variety denomination. Right versus obligation, we saw that before, and we also see the emotional versus rational choice. The emotional choice is typical of trademarks when we create the hype, when we work a lot on the marketing of something. This is partially true also for a plant variety denomination in general. However, it's more of a rational choice when it comes to growers and growing conditions. Conflict between plant variety denomination and geographical indication. There is, first of all, when we receive a plant variety denomination proposal, we have to take into consideration whether it contains a geographical name or a geographical indication. Why? Because as an examiner at the CPBO, our denomination team takes into consideration whether this difference. Now there is a different legal basis for the potential refusal. For the geographical name, this is just the name of a certain region or a country or a city that has to be known for the cultivation of that specific plant variety. So in the case of Castilla for pepper variety, saying that the Castilla region is known for the cultivation of peppers means that this may create a problem with the proposal. As of the case of geographical indication, so a geographical name that is protected at the level of the European Commission, so there is an actual IP right in place, well, the reason for the refusal may be instead the fact that there is a third party's right. And how do we do this assessment? When we are comparing all these IP rights, databases created by the agencies taking care of the registration of these IP rights and the Commission can help us. So we have the eSearch Plus for trademarks, where you can see all the characteristics of a certain trademark, including whether it had a problem with plant variety denominations. We will see that later. We have the eAmbrosia portal and the GI view portal for checking checking geographical indications and their scope of protection. We have the Variety Finder, which is the database that we manage here at the CPVO, where you can see all the characteristics of plant variety denomination and also trademarks in class 31, which is the class for agricultural products, and we will see why that's important in a minute. Conflicts between plant variety denominations and trademarks. The legal framework is composed of twofold. So we have on one side Article 63 of the basic regulation, and this is important especially for this provision, and the fact that plant variety denominations, be generic, cannot be descriptive, of course, but they cannot be misleading, but they cannot include a third party's right, so they cannot breach the monopoly on a certain wording of another person, which means that they cannot be identical, for example, to an existing trademark. On the other hand, we have Article 7. Oh, sorry, I should have said that this is Article 63 of what we call the basic regulation, which is Regulation 2100 of 1994. And this is, on the other side, we have Article 7.1m of the EU TMR, the regulation disciplining European Union trademarks. And in that case, we see how when the UIPO receives a trademark proposal, it has to check whether there is an earlier denomination, plant variety denomination, of course, that is registered at the UPOV or national level or at the CPVO level, and that concerns the same or closely related species. How do we do this assessment? So what is the assessment that the trademark examiner at UIPO has to do when it has the doubt that there is a conflicting plant variety denomination? These are the three elements that are taken into consideration when assessing the content of the Variety Finder database and when drafting the provisional refusal letter. So first of all, the trademark consists or reproduces in its essential element the earlier denomination. We will see in a second an example on that. We saw that the plant variety right has to be registered and it has to concern the same or closely related species. And this is why we take into consideration only class 31 in principle. Because only in class 31 we have goods that can be agricultural products or horticultural products or also ornamentals that can create a problem with this requirement, this concerning the same or closely related species. But let's see an example. So here is the, as you can see, the legal basis and the three elements that we take into consideration. This example comes straight from the UIPO guidelines, so I didn't make it up, and I think it's very adequate to explain what we're doing here. So imagine to be a UIPO examiner, we receive this lovely trademark proposal with this main element as a HAR and bio. First of all, we have to check whether the overlap between the trademark and the plant variety denomination is done on the essential elements of the trademark. And this is the case in our example because you see that the plant variety denomination corresponds to the word part of this element of the trademark. And this is, we can say that this is an essential element. It doesn't have to be the main element, but it is an essential element because it's bigger, because it's more central, and because this additional element bio is somehow non-distinctive for agricultural products, right? So let's go to the of course, we are assuming that we found this plant variety denomination on the Variety Finder database. We have to check whether it's registered at EU level or national or UPOV level, and then it has to be for the same or closely related species. Here, our job is quite easier because the proposal for trademark refers to all agricultural products, right? So this is a very general wording in class 31 of the NIST classification, and we see that the plant variety denomination refers to a cotton variety. So of course there is an overlap also on the side of the goods of the trademark. In this case, we will have to send a provisional refusal for this trademark proposal. These are other examples coming from the Board of Appeal of UIPO case law. Here you can see how the Joya variety denomination is the essential element of this trademark, and the micro plant variety denomination was also considered as the essential element of this trademark. Here is interesting because it really makes you understand the difference between the essential element and the main element. Of course, you can see how this is not the main element. However, it was considered as relevant. And finally, we have the only case that went to the Court of Justice, which means that there is not a lot of conflict in this area, and it was about this trademark proposal called as Rose Monique. In this case, basically, the examiner and then the Board of Appeal and the Court of Justice, the General Court, considered that this part of the trademark, Rose Monique, was generic, was just describing, let's say, the nature of the goods at hand. It's needless to say that, of course, this trademark was proposed for class 31 ornamentals. So the trademark proposal was accepted in this case because it was considered that there was still an element, despite this generic portion, that distinguish was able to work as a indication of commercial origin of the ornamental goods on the market. In this case, of course, we see how this the refusal based on Article 7.1m was not sustained. However, we still have some doubts on the lack of distinctive character and descriptiveness of the trademark pursuant to Article 7.1 B and C. However, this is another story. Okay, so we're over with the conflict between trademarks and plant variety denominations. There are also possible trademarks, possible conflicts between geographical indications and trademarks. In here, what is important to remember, and it really depends on what it came first, right? So we have two scenarios here. And the first is when the geographical indication comes later than the trademark. Sorry, when the geographical indication comes before and we have a later trademark. In this case, we have an absolute or a relative grounds for refusal in a similar way as the Article 7.1m that we saw before. We also have Article 7.1j of the EU TMR. In this case, we apply the principle of priority. So, of course, the prior geographical indication will have to prevail when compared to the trademark, provided that, of course, the trademark relates to relevant goods and services. And in this case, we talk about absolute or relative grounds for refusal. An absolute ground for refusal is something that is checked by UIPO on an ex officio basis, and usually it relates to all the reasons why the trademark cannot be registered, because maybe it's descriptive, because maybe it contains a swear word or some indication against public order, or other, let's say, generic indications like plant variety denomination. So in that, GIs are part of this ex officio assessment of the UIPO. However, they can also be used as a prior right in a relative ground for refusal proceedings. In other words, once the initial examination for an application for the European Union trademark is done, there is a publication of this application, and then a period for third parties with interest to raise an opposition, which basically means that a third party consider a certain trademark not that shouldn't be protected because there is another trademark that is would create a likelihood of confusion or a geographical indication. So this could also be used as a relative grounds for refusal. As of prior trademark, so this is the case where the trademark came before the geographical indication. In this case, according to the applicable legislation, actually we have a principle of coexistence unless it is possible to prove a bad faith. There is an exception, of course, for well-known trademarks, and in this case is because we assume that they are known and cannot coexist with the geographical indication. But life is not only about conflicts, it's not only about fighting for what's mine, what's yours. There's also the possibility of synergies among IP rights. This is a lovely example, it's very well known. You may all know the Pink Lady apple. It's very nice. I think it originates from Australia, and it has a long history of success, and is protected, at least this specific logo is protected under a trademark in class 31, of course. However, what you may not know is that actually Pink Lady is not one single apple, but it identified 3 very similar varieties that have these 3 denominations. To me, they look the same. Maybe they look the same to you too, but they do have technical differences that us as general consumers cannot see. This is another example of synergy. Here we also have the use of a double trademark. I don't know if you can see that. Here we have Zespri, which is the main trademark and is the name of the undertaking selling this kiwi. And here we have Green and Sungold, which is a sub-trademark identifying these specific lines of products. And then we also have something that we would not see in this label, because this label is targeting the final consumer. This is what we see at the supermarket when, as final consumers, we are picking the kiwi that we would like to use in our household. These kiwis also have a plum variety denomination that is actually ZE005 and 007, and it's just a code denomination. And why is this essential? Because for growers who intend to sell a certain variety, a certain type of kiwi on the market, it is essential for them to know what they're going to sell and what are the growing conditions. So this is how they can interact in a correct way. This way of managing IP rights will not create the conflicts that we saw before, because what happens, what I personally saw in a couple of occasions happening, is that the plum variety holder tries to register a trademark with the very same plum variety denomination as the plum variety protected. No, so what it does is that it first applies for a plum variety right, and then uses that same denomination as a trademark. In that case, the applicant or holder will see its request for registration for a trademark refused, as we saw before, because of Article 7.1m. And this is because it doesn't make a proper use of the IP rights, unlike in this case where we can see that the holder will never have the problem that we saw before. And this is once again another example. Here we have the aviflora, which is the primary trademark. The secondary is more about the undertakings, right? Here we have the species name of the tulip. These were bulbs. Here we have the parrot prints. Parrot prints is the plum variety denomination, and it ensures to me that these bulbs that I cannot really qualify in the beginning when I'm buying them will turn out to be like this. So like curly and pink, etc. Another example, a fantasy example in this case, here we can see a bottle of wine. Actually, see, we said before the plum variety denominations are usually targeting growers, and they very rarely refer to the final consumer. No, we saw that in the kiwis. As a final consumer, I would not probably see the ZE007 plum variety denomination. But this is not the case for wines. Why? Because the grapevine denomination, the grapevine type used for a wine, has a completely different function for the connoisseur of wine products. So in this case, we would most probably see the trademark, so the name that this producer gave to its own wine, the variety denomination, Tempranillo, of the grapevine used, that will give us already a certain hint on what the characteristics of the wine are going to be. And then finally we have the PDO, the Ribera del Duero, which ensures that that wine has certain characteristics and it comes from a certain region, and this is a guarantee of quality. Another example of use, as you can see in some catalogs online for growers, is using very simply the trademark symbol, right? Here you can see how the holder of the plum variety right used in a differentiated way the denomination and a more eye-catching name as a trademark. And this was it for the sign. What I would like you to remember is really about the function. When you're designing your IP strategy, it's really essential that you take a minute to think about the function of the IP rights that you're using. And my personal advice, which is not an opinion of the organization I work with, is that you don't need a very eye-catching name for your plum variety denomination. You can very well just present a code that is useful for you, a breeder's reference, and then have your plant variety protected. And then when you're putting it on the market, maybe think of something that it may be more marketing friendly, right? So this is possible when we know the difference of the purpose of these IP rights. And this is the conclusive part of this presentation. It is, as I said before, more for the sake of completeness, because we are talking about IP rights in the agri-food sector, and in the agri-food sector there is also patents. Patents are, we talked about them during the first part of this webinar, and they are legal title granting to the proprietor the right to prevent third parties, so they are an exclusive right on the invention, and they usually last 20 years, plus 5 in the case of drugs, but this is not the case, of course, of the food sector. The legal framework is always the same. We have the patent convention. We also have some explanatory guidelines, which are more soft law, and the national laws. The point with patents is that there is the possibility to that an invention consists of a plant per se. However, we do have to make a difference between what is protectable by plant varieties and what is protectable by patents. Here you can see the single plant variety can be has to be protected by a community plant variety rights, and when it's created through essentially biological processes. I have to clarify with this slide that the process to create a plant variety per se is not protectable under the community plant variety rights system. The community plant variety rights system run by the CPBO only refers to the single plant variety, so the result, the plant in its characteristics, but not the way it is produced. The process cannot be protected, but it can be covered by a patent. However, the plant variety that is protected by a community plant variety right has to be produced by an essentially biological process. You may wonder what's an essentially biological process. One of the most, the easiest example is crossing and selection. You just cross two plant varieties with certain characteristics and you select the offsprings that you consider having the desired characteristics. So this is an essentially biological process. It's crossing the entire genome of two individuals and then selecting what I want. What is covered by patents? It's more about plants that are not usually identified as a single plant varieties, but plants in general, and that are produced through a technical process. A very easy example is genetic engineering. What I take is just the genome of a certain plant. I take a gene from a bacteria that I like, I add it to the plant, and then magically the plant has new characteristics. Of course, it doesn't work like that, but I'm a lawyer, so I'm not able to go into the details of this. It is sufficient for the level of depth that we need today that we know this. Of course, why are we wondering about whether something is protectable through a patent or a community plant variety right? Because there is the prohibition of double protection. Since these two systems are different from a legal point of view, from the point of view of the scope, they were developed in a very different moment of time and with the territorial scope that is not exactly the same, there is a double protection prohibition. We have to choose between one or the other right. So before we provided very clear-cut examples, however, we have to take into consideration that the European Patent Convention and the basic regulations, so the two, let's say, the UPOV Convention also, the two main legal bases of these two IP rights were drafted in the 90s, in the early 90s, so almost 30 years ago. And you can imagine that technology in the production of plant was at a completely different step of progress. Many things happened during the last 30 years, and we are faced with a legislation that not always is able to respond to this frenetic change, of course. This is also because when it comes to amending a legislation that regards agricultural product, biotech, like the biotech directive that we saw there, this creates always a lot of discussions. It's very important that all the opinions are heard. So you can see how the process of updating this legislation is very slow and painful sometimes. This is just to say that basically the legislation that we have in place does not allow us to make a clear difference between patent and the community plant variety rights protectable material when it comes to some specific legislation, and we have some jurisprudence on that of the EPO Board of Appeal and Enlarged Board of Appeal. If you want to know more about this, I left you the numbers of the cases and the opinion 3/19 that is very interesting. That also tries to make a difference between what is to be put under patent and community plant variety. Right. So this is the end of my presentation. Just to sum up, we have to focus once again on the different functions of the IP rights in the agri-food sector. We saw how it's very important to keep the awareness on the managing of conflicts, how the different purposes and the features have to be known when designing our strategy, and how they can be wisely combined to constitute a very strong business tool. And on this, I thank you for your attention. And if you have any question, also after this webinar, you can send an email to the help desk or also to our contacts that are here. We're also on social medias, and you can send us also an email. Thank you.
Thank you very much also for the presentation. At the moment, I do not see questions, but I will take advantage of the time that participants are using to think, to show my screen once again and repeat that you're going to receive today's slide and recording at the latest tomorrow morning. And I will also add what Ursula was mentioning before with regard to the link for some more presentation. Besides that link, you're also going to receive all the relevant links that will guide you to the European IP Helpdesk material, and that is relevant regarding this point, and a couple of further information if you want to dive deeper into the topic. But there's the first question from Luigi. There you go. Does the CPVO have access to some market data related to registered PVs, plant varieties?
Okay, market data are not essential except for the novelty requirement here at the CPVO. So Article 10 of the basic regulation requires that the plant variety before the application was not put on the market, and there is a grace period that depends on the territory. So we do not receive very precise market data on whether the variety was put on the market, but we usually rely on the declaration of the applicant. And if we find other elements from other sources, we may ask for clarification. But this is the only context where market data are useful for us. Usually, I mean, in principle, you may develop a plant variety, you can protect it and just keep it in your garden. It's absolutely not a problem, it's your choice.
Thanks for the answer. Other questions? If you have questions, that's actually the moment to ask them. Otherwise, as also already said, you can actually always write an email to the European IP Helpdesk helpline, which is helpline@iprhelpdesk.eu, or also from the website, and from the European IP Helpdesk website, which once again is this one here. You can see on the right hand side, maybe you cannot see it now, it's very small. ec.europa.eu/IP-helpdesk, and on there you have the helpline section. You can simply open up and type in. You can ask your questions in English, I think Polish, Italian, Spanish, and French. Would suggest, however, really to do this in English, because life of the expert is going to be much easier. And we're always going to find somebody answering to your questions, or also directly to the CPVO, to the agency as well. But I see nobody is currently asking questions, and certainly the presentation was very clear, at least for me, I hope for you as well. And having said that, then we are going to end up the presentation, but not before thanking very much my friend and a lovely expert, Ursula, for the class you've given us today. It's been a pleasure for me to have a chance to host you again, and I hope you're coming back very soon.
Thank you for having given us the chance to share again our knowledge and talk about a little bit what we do. Thank you.
I'll send you the recording to you as well later on, and the MP4. I wish you all a lovely day. Thank you for being with us, and see you. For those of you who are going to be present, tomorrow we're going to talk about the importance of intellectual property for small and medium enterprises, and so that's going to be an internal webinar of the European IP Helpdesk. And see you there if you're interested. Otherwise, you've got the full list of webinars until Christmas, more or less. You're very welcome to join there whenever you'd like. Thanks a lot. And goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.